All of that out the way, let's get to the reason why we're here and talk about the latest episode of the Marvel Studios original series. Episode 2 of Loki just recently premiered. It's entitled Breaking Brad. And of course,
Mm,
last week we talked about the season 2 premiere of Loki, which is notably the only second season of a Marvel television show at this point. So it was a little bit of a weird experience, I think, to even talk about a show that's been on and now we're coming back and reviewing it again. We haven't had that
yeah,
experience yet, but I think we both walked away feeling very optimistic about the rest of the series, feeling really good about what they did with the premiere, the character introductions, the new locations, and obviously the story that they're setting up here. So before we dive into spoilers, before we talk about all the specific details with this week's episode of Loki, I just want to pass it over to you, man, to get your general big picture thoughts. What did you think about episode 2 of season 2 of Loki?
I think this was another solid episode of Loki, man. I don't think it had quite that energy that the first episode came in with, nor did I technically really expect it to. But man, I definitely enjoyed this episode. This episode has a couple things that I really like in it, even that the first one didn't have, dealing with some kind of some dark undertones and some some of those things. But man, I think it moved the story forward. And I think you know, again, the only thing I would also kind of put against it a little bit is the pacing. A little bit was a little like, oh, where are we going here? Are we going here? Are we going there? But other than that, man, everything that transpired, I still love the way it looks. I think the acting in this episode was absolutely superb, specifically Rafael Casal. And like I think they're still on to something here. So they still got me. I think episode 2 was good, and I don't have too many complaints. Just simply not as good as the first.
I'm largely in the same spot as you. Episode 2 was very enjoyable for me. I liked it a lot. It's not quite as good as the first one, but when you start off in such a high octane way as that season 2 premiere did, it's hard to keep up that same momentum. But apparently, the rest of the season probably will, at least from what we're hearing. But I think I think episode 2 is a great sort of scene setter in terms of introducing some of these new characters, really spending time with them, most notably the Brad Wolf character, understanding some motivations, peeling back additional layers to certain characters that we have long been associated with now, whether it's Loki or Mobius himself, and just adding more layers of depth to their characters, which I think is going to pay off in really really big ways in the rest of the season. And I love what they did with that stuff and just those small quiet moments, those conversations, and really allowing the opportunity for Rafael Casal to kind of shine and kind of steal a couple of scenes. He was really really good here as well. I also liked
Yeah.
Wumi Musaku and also Sophia DiMartino coming back here,
Hmm.
with sort of a bigger presence as we saw her briefly in last week's episode. Definitely had a bigger presence in this week's episode as well. And so the character work here, I think, is like what shines the most. Like just having the
Yeah.
opportunity to take a take a beat really quickly and then sort of assess how people are feeling, understand them a little bit better because we do have to start to land the plane on these arcs. Like if this is possibly the last season of Loki, we don't really know. We don't know what that might look like or if they're going to springboard into Avengers or whatever the case may be. I think that they're doing a lot of really good work to get us to that place. So I really enjoyed it. I think it was a solid and strong episode, and it has me super excited for next week as well. Just because I think that now that we've done this one, I think the rest of the series is just going to be moving at like 90 miles an hour. I think we're just going to
Yeah.
be moving really quick. There's going to be so much happening, so much thrown at us. So I think that this one was kind of the necessary, I don't want to say
Hmm.
pause, but it definitely slowed the momentum. But I think it was kind of a key thing for them to do because they know that it's going to be a very fast paced, very high octane season. But with all of that out the way, let's get into spoilers. If you've not seen episode 2 of Loki season 2, go check that out on Disney Plus and come back and finish out the rest of our conversation. And we, of course, have to start off with the way that this episode started, which is in the past. We go back to 1977 and we get to see Brad Wolf, played by Rafael Casal, at a movie premiere, essentially. Now, we know that Brad Wolf in the TVA is a hunter. He's Hunter X5, and we initially met him in last week's episode, but he has sort of diverged from his responsibilities at the TVA and has now ended up in London in 1977. He's still on the sacred timeline, but he's acting as a film actor. And basically, Loki and Mobius are looking for him because they need more information about Sylvie's whereabouts. They find him, and then ensues a chase between Loki and Brad. And we get a really, really interesting and cool sequence in this particular set piece where we get to see Loki uses powers, which I didn't
Mhm.
realize and recognize how long it's kind of been since we've actively seen him use his powers in
Yep.
the way that he did. Obviously, he's a god, he's the god of mischief, but because he was in the TVA all this time, powers don't work there and we can't see him flex those
Right.
muscles, but we got to see him bust out all of that stuff that just makes him who he is and kind of tap into that villainy that we've come to associate with that character. So, what did you think about just the whole setup of this episode? The fact that we were in the past, we got to see Rafael Casal act like this movie star, Brad Wolf. There's
Mhm.
comic connections there, of course, and then of course the interactions between Loki and Brad once he ultimately chased him and basically revealed to him like, yeah, man, you can't match up to me because I'm the god of mischief. I can do whatever I want with you at this point.
Man, I thought it was super fun across the board. Like this dude, Rafael Casal, man, really, I think he's so talented that like I feel like he's been a character for a long time. If that makes sense. Like I'm literally watching the show, like, huh, this dude, he wasn't in season one. Like it just feels like he was already part of the cast, and so it was really cool going back in time and seeing him just be Brad Wolf and own that, and you know, really be this like very questionable character, man. That we have no idea what he really has going on or what he wants. But it's really what is really interesting about his character is there's so much, I think, through line in the overarching story of wanting to know your life on the timeline and wanting to know, you know, what's going on with the other branching timelines. He actually has a lot to his character to explore, which is interesting. But again, I really love the time travel of this. I really like how it looks back here in 1977 and in these all these movie things going on. If you look in the back, you can see a Kingo poster. So, you know, they haven't forgot about the Eternals. We still here. The Eternals are still here. But man, this interrogation scene, bro, where like you said, Loki is finally chasing him down, using his powers. I just remember being like, there was a moment I was like, Loki, why aren't you? I actually had a realization like, why aren't you using your powers right here? And then he uses them as soon as I said something. I was like, what's going on? You're like, this should be easy for you. And so I love that they were finally able to display Loki's powers, but I also love how Loki felt. I don't know. There's a moment in these shows, right, where you do feel like Loki is slowly becoming a hero. And then in this interrogation chase scene, you're like, oh no, this dude's still dark. Like this dude is still hella scary. The shadows on the wall with the horns coming, the Loki horns coming out. I was like, oh man, no, this dude, he could still do some crazy stuff. And so it's interesting that they really harped on that for the rest of the episode. But it has me thinking again of like the spectrum of anti-hero-ness that Loki fits on at this point, right? Of course, he was indeed a villain, but seeing this again, this chase down and being like, no, this dude is capable of a lot of stuff still, and he's still really scary. I think is really interesting, but cool sequence overall. I really enjoyed it, man. Again, I really enjoyed the darkness. I like the chase, and I really like everything going on with that scene, man. I hope they continue to do a lot of cool time travel stuff here, which we know they will, of course. But being specific to certain times of I think just culture, I think is interesting in paying attention to those kind of small details.
Yeah, I mean, becoming a time travel show is probably one of the most fun aspects that they can really lean into with this season in particular, because that's just going to keep up the momentum and keep up the sort of kinetic pace that they've established, and you get to just see Brad Wolf here living his best life. I equate it to the fact that it's like Joe Pantoliano in the Matrix, you know, who played Cypher, who did not want to exist in the real world. He wanted to
Mm-mm.
figure out a way to get back to the fake reality, the matrix that had been created. He was like, I want this steak, man. I don't want to live this fucking real life and
Yeah.
eat that shit that we eat every day. And like, this is, I think, kind of another example of that, where you see these TVA employees who all of a sudden become enlightened, and then they now know and realize like, well, wait a
Mm-hmm.
second, my life has not been what I thought it's been. Let's go see what the real world has for me. And for Brad Wolf in particular, it has, I think, significantly better returns for him. He gets to just go make movies, be a movie star. Again, they're tying this into the comics, you know. And Brad Wolf, he plays, you know, a slasher serial killer in a movie, but then he ends up becoming that exact character in the comics. I think it's called Zaniac or something. So I don't know if they'll go that far. I think it might just be like a cool nod, but that's one of the cases where it's like, man,
Mm-hmm.
this guy has a really good life. He doesn't want to go back to his old life. And we see that reflected in Mobius later. And we'll talk about, you know, sort of his experience with knowing his true reality and what his true purpose is compared to his life in the TVA. And then on the opposite side of that, to see Loki, be in pursuit of this guy and to bust out those shadows and to shapeshift and to create copies and the crown comes and all of that stuff. I mean, this entire series has been about just the dichotomy between Loki's just shades of who he is, between him being
Mhm.
a villain and a hero and his journey to becoming a hero. And I think that that's why we root for him so much, because he is so complex. He is so intricate with every movement, because you never really know where he's going to go with that stuff. And he can be dark at one moment, but then at the very next moment, he's doing probably the most heroic thing ever, or he might do the most
Exactly.
romantic thing ever, as we saw with his interactions with Sylvie. So there's a lot of great stuff there that they're setting up and that they obviously pay off later in this
Mhm.
episode. I do want to quickly talk about there's this moment back at the TVA that kind of had me realizing, sort of what I think we're setting up here. And it's before we get to the interrogation, really, but you see Loki, Mobius, Hunter X, is it X-15? Wumi Musaku? I can't
B.
B-15. It's so many damn numbers and letters
So
at this
many
point.
numbers and letters, yeah.
But it's them three, and it's also Casey, who is, I think,
Mhm.
having a much more prominent role now in this show. And what I'm starting to notice is that in the TVA, like, these are like our core characters, along with
Yep.
OB. Like, these five are really the five that are kind of leading this resistance against, just everything that's happening. They are like operating within good spirits of trying to make sure that the TVA is going to be the line of
Mhm.
defense against whatever comes from Kang whenever he does come. What do you think about, just sort of this group, that's been assembled amongst these five? And there's also that really cool interaction later in the episode between Casey and OB, where Casey realized that he met the guy who wrote the TVA handbook. He's like,
Yeah.
wait a second, you're Ouroboros? You wrote the TVA handbook. I'm such a big fan. And they're both incredibly smart, but it was like a really cool
Mhm.
moment to get to see them fan out. So I think it's still early. We'll probably see them come together a little bit more officially later. But what do you think about just sort of the different parts of that? The fact that we got Mobius and Loki, and then we got Hunter
Mhm.
B-15, and now Casey's coming into the fold, and obviously Ouroboros makes up a really important part of the whole equation.
Yeah, I just really like this one person isn't about to save all kind of thing here, which is definitely could be right. You could easily be like, oh, titular character Loki is the hero for everybody, and just go with that. But that's not the reality we have. The reality we have is that the TVA is this giant organization with 1,000 people. It's going to take a little bit more than just Loki to save the universe here. So I love that they're ingesting characters and again what feels like a makeshift team, people that literally have to come together to save lives. And I think they're doing it in a way. I just love how diverse everybody is, man. It's like a black woman, a God of Mischief, an Asian dude, two Asian dudes, I guess. I don't know what Casey is technically. I have no idea what Casey is, but you know what I mean. I just really love how diverse this cast of people is. And they're all very charismatic and they're all really funny too. But I love how they're slowly coming together in what feels like a team, because I think that will all pay off later down the line. And so I also love how again I feel like OB and Casey will have their place, just like I was kind of talking about last week. How it feels like B-15 is going to have to lead a charge, right? And I feel like, man, if Casey got the upstairs and OB got the downstairs, you know what I mean, and she can help facilitate that way. And then again, Mobius and Loki have to be out in the field chasing people and do what they need to do. It just feels like the team is coming together. It's taking a couple episodes, but the team is coming together, and I can't wait to see. I think how they branch that out. But then my favorite part of OB and Casey meeting each other is Casey is like, "Can you sign my manual?" I was like, "This is the nerdiest thing I have ever heard. Can you sign my TVA manual?" But it makes sense, and I love how they're nerding out over TVA stuff. Because again, to be honest, one of the things that's not working out so well is the flux arc, right? Kind of this time arc that's coming. It's not that the arc's not working, it's that the explanation of what's going on isn't as seamless as it used to be, because there's still no missed minutes. And I kind of talked about that last week, as it feels like OB might have to be that now. But now also it feels like Casey might be part of that. It feels like it may not be just on OB. It feels like maybe OB and Casey can both try to fill that void of explanation that is left by Miss Minutes being with Renslayer. So hopefully that also becomes the case as again Casey becomes more and more frequent in the show.
Yeah, the temporal aura stuff is still I'm just out on that at this point. It's
Mm-hmm.
still not just working
Exactly.
for me. unless they can come up with a way to really engage me and entice me. Like I know it's a ticking time clock device essentially. Like that's what we're operating against, and ultimately that's really all that matters beyond the specifics of it. But with this team, that's coming together, it's cool because they all serve very specific functions. Hunter B15, obviously, she comes from a very specific sort of set of skills and a background. She can provide insight that nobody else can. Mobius obviously has been a leader at the TVA for such a long time. Loki, with all of his tricks and his wit and just his knowledge of people, and of course Sylvie and his relationship with her, and what he saw at the end of time is crucial to all of this. We saw OB's importance last week because he knows essentially everything about the TVA. He built a lot of this stuff, and he has all of the scientific wizardry that it'll take to figure out the solutions to these problems. But Casey is also he's I think he's simultaneously like one of us as the audience because he's kind of like sitting
Mhm.
back and witnessing this stuff, but he's still intelligent enough and knows enough to be able to contribute and to add another perspective because he's been like a receptionist. But
Yeah,
as a receptionist, you acquire a lot of information, like more information than most people probably would, because you're
that's
there
true.
every day ingesting and gaining a lot of that insight and information about how the TVA works and the different departments and who's who, just the things that a hunter can't concern themselves with or a Mobius can't concern themselves with. Like they probably heard of these things, but a receptionist is going to get that ground level day-to-day information that is just so crucial. And Casey's also funny, too. He's
Yeah,
very
it's true.
he's very
Mhm.
lovable and affectionate and funny. So I think it's a really great character. So I can't wait to see all of these five work together even more because I know that they're going to be a big prominent factor as a unit as we continue to move forward through the season. But let's talk about the interrogation when Brad Wolf is ultimately captured and brought back to the TVA. They're trying to get some information out of him. They're trying to figure out the whereabouts of Sylvie, and he just flips the script on them because he already knows what this whole game is. He knows that there's a good cop, bad cop situation. He's
Mhm.
done this. He's been a hunter, so it's not really working on him. And he says some pretty dark shit to the characters in the room, specifically to Loki and Mobius. I want to start with Loki specifically. He says to him, quote, "You're just trying to make up for all the terrible, awful shit you've done in your life, you pathetic little man. At the end of the day, you just make everything worse," end quote. This kind of calls back to some of the things that Mobius was telling Loki in season 1 when Loki was first brought to the TVA. I remember Mobius telling
Mhm.
Loki that you really only exist to make other people great. You only exist to advance the missions and to help people eventually find out their greatest purpose, right? And that's ultimately what led to the assembling of the Avengers, and that
Mhm.
Loki's a loser and he's destined to be a loser. And we see that Brad Wolf here is saying a lot of the same stuff, but he's much more frank with it. He just calls him pathetic. He's calling him all sorts of stuff. And it looks like it's having an effect on Loki, but Loki is also kind of weirdly playing it off, and he wants to hear more. He wants to hear everything that Brad Wolf has to say. It's a bit hard to read at times as to whether or not Loki believes what he's saying and whether or not he feels like it's true, or if he's actually evolved as a person. What did you think about just hearing all of that stuff again, Loki's reaction to it, and just really I think just the development of him as a character, just knowing that again, the real, I think, narrative thrust of the show, really the purpose is to track that trajectory about his evolution as a villain initially to becoming an
Mhm.
anti-hero to maybe even just becoming a full-fledged hero within the season and maybe in future projects.
Man, first, shout out to the performances in the scene, bro. Rafael Casal specifically and Tom Hiddleston were going crazy. I was like, okay, is this what is this is TV? You know what I mean? This is the acting and kind of feel that I love to see, man. But man, this idea that when Loki is hearing these things, like you said, it's really hard to tell if it's getting under his skin or not. It's really hard to tell how he feels about all of it. But what I will say is that he did not react how Mobius reacted, and it makes me feel like Loki has grown. Right? I feel like season one Loki might have done something, might have hit.
Oh,
You
he was
know,
pissed when Mobius basically told him all that. He couldn't accept
exactly.
it.
He
He still
couldn't
tried to escape
accept
and all
it.
of that.
Exactly. And so I have to say he has grown. I think maybe it got to him a little bit, right? Because the only reason I say that is because the torture that he goes through is kind of crazy. I was
He had
like,
a
I thought,
receipt for that ass for
hey, bro,
sure.
I thought an arm was gonna break or like something was gonna happen in that little box that he was in. I was like, okay, you felt a little something, but I think that reactionary part of Loki is slowly fading away. Loki being very self aware in that moment, right, and him saying, "You're right. about a lot of the things I was, or him even talking to Mobius, and Mobius saying he acted off of emotion. He was like, man, I I literally led an alien invasion in the middle of New York and I kicked Iron Man through a window. Like this dude was saying all of these things, you know what I mean? He was being very vulnerable and very open about how he felt in that moment during the events of the Avengers and being like, yeah, you're right. I was, and I think that self-awareness again makes me feel like Loki has grown past a lot of those places that what's the name, X5, yes,
Yeah.
that that X5 makes it seem like he's still in that. And so again, a lot of this show and Loki in general is about is a big existentialism, you know, kind of cool TV show. But I think Loki is realizing in slow motion that it really is actions that determines who you are to be, not necessarily, you know, who you will remain. And so I feel like he's seeing that, and that is what is helping him slowly become a hero, at least in this moment. Again, he was a villain, then he was like anti-hero, but in this moment he's trying to save the world. And so I do kind of feel like he is slowly evolving to a new and different Loki, and I think that's pretty cool.
It's smart to make us continue to ask those questions as well, right? Because
Hmm.
there might be some viewers out there who haven't fully bought into the transformation or the evolution, because we have to
Yeah.
remember that this version of Loki is not the same Loki that we saw in Infinity War. This
Right.
Loki is fresh off of the alien invasion of New York. He's fresh off of the Battle of New York, where he just tried to murder all the Avengers and
Hmm.
basically take over Earth as his own dominion, you know? So this guy is still relatively, I think, sort of early in his stage of maturation and progression from where he was. And so I think it's smart to still include these questions here to know that, yeah, he's not all the way there, because none of this type of work internally and emotionally that needs to be done can be done overnight. Like that's by no means the case. And we don't really have a great sense of time and how much time has passed in the events of this show, but I think it's easy enough to say that in the time that he's been in the TVA and that he's been working with the TVA, he has had a tremendous amount of growth to where we even saw him last season, because he did not react
Hmm.
the same, you know, and he was a little bit more cerebral in his approach. You know, I
Yeah.
think last
Exactly.
season he would have just had an outburst like we saw. He would have just lunged at him like Mobius very much did in the very next scene. And instead, he was like, you know what? We'll let you have that. We're gonna go have a talk, have some key lime pie, and when I come back, I got that receipt for your ass. And that's what he did. You know, very
Hmm.
much more strategic and cerebral in his approach. And early versions of Loki and Thor: The Dark World and Avengers, like he was, I think, much more of an irrational and
Hmm.
erratic at times type of
Yeah.
individual who would kind of act off of impulse. And we see that that's just not really the case here. So I love that small subtlety, you know. And Tom Hiddleston, he had a quote to Marvel.com. He said, you know, maybe the season is more about the burden and less about the glory in his purpose as a
Mm.
character, where, you know, season one was kind of about that self-awareness. So I think we see that, you know, he's gone through the self-awareness stage, and now he's kind of holding who he was in the past. And that is a burden, to carry that knowledge, to know that, damn, I was a piece of shit. You know, I did some very
Yep.
terrible things, but I have to own that. I have to accept that and take accountability. But now I have to move forward.
Yeah.
Now, conversely, Mobius, not quite there. Seems like he got a little bit more to work on, because Brad turns his attentions to Mobius, starts to get into all the stuff behind the scenes about Mobius's past life. And don't you want to know who you were? Don't you
Hmm.
feel angry and upset that your life was stolen from you? Look what I did. I went to go make movies. I'm having a great time before you all kidnapped me. Doesn't that get under you, that you're just living this life, this fake life in the TVA, and you might have a family, you might have a wife, you might have kids, like, go see that, but you're scared. You don't want to take that leap. And obviously that definitely gets under Mobius's skin. He gets physical with Brad, tries to play it off, says like, I got it all under control. It was a tactic, but later
Hmm.
admits, once he's having the power with Loki, it was not a tactic. Like, obviously it did bother him. And so we started to get clues in season one about Mobius's interests and who he was before the TVA. They're obviously leaning a lot more into it. I think the jet ski clue is still out there. We're still trying to figure out, like, yeah, was Mobius like a huge jet skier or something like that? But, you know, what did you think about the interaction between him and Loki, and having that realization that, you know, he's accepting his place here, and he's kind of, I guess, fearful to see what his life might be like on the outside, because it could potentially be a great one.
Yeah, man. First, a pie room is crazy. Like, what? It's just a room
Just a
with a
room of pies.
with a bunch of pie just sitting out. This thing is crazy. And second of all, why is it so green? Like, key lime pie does not look like that. Where did they get that from? I don't. I'm trying to figure out. Like, even if it's good, that cannot. I just don't know why it looks like that. It looks so crazy. It's actually green. I don't. Man, that was another question I had, but. man, them harping on again this existentialism thing, man, is really cool to me, and kind of pulling out these pieces of Mobius that we all have questions about, even himself, is so interesting, especially when he says, if it's something bad that old life contained, right, I can handle that. But if it was something good, I don't know if I can handle that, because you telling me the TVA took me out of something good, and I do have a feeling that it was like the happiest life ever. Mobius was a freaking, he had a family, his daughter and his wife, and they went on a boat trip, and he was out there jet skiing. You know what I mean? I think that's that, because that's what they make us feel like, right? I'm sure
Yeah.
there probably is some plot twist in there about what Mobius really was doing on the timeline. I'm sure it's coming eventually, but that's what they make us seem like. And I love that idea that I wouldn't be able to handle that life being good, because how could you take that away from me, right? If it's a bad life, who cares? I'm in jail, you kidnapped me to be in the TVA. Hell yeah.
I had a bid. I had 10 years left. Like,
Hell
yeah,
yeah.
please.
I would love to be at the TVA. And so but it's so interesting, because everyone is asking Mobius, like, why wouldn't you want to look? And I really can't blame him for the answer that he's given, though, spending thousands and thousands of years, man, in this place that there has no concept of time. Then you being able to say, oh no, I had a happy different life, because you could argue, really, not until Loki showed up, there was no excitement in Mobius's life, right? Like, there was not much going on, which is why I think he's so keen to these adventures with Loki. You know what I mean? I think he likes him as a friend, and he's opening up to Loki and things like that, and vice versa. And I just, yeah, man, it's becoming an interesting story about what it means to exist in certain planes, and what you want your life to look like. And so I wonder what it'll be like once, because I feel like they can't ask this question, right, of where was Mobius, and then them not show us. I feel like they'll show us eventually. And so I can't wait to see maybe where his life might have lied on the sacred timeline. But I love, like you said, that character work of everybody starting to open up, and we're starting to figure out where people's heads are, because man, I think Mobius had some real answers when it came to being asked a lot of these questions.
Yeah, I mean, he's the walking embodiment of again that reference I made earlier, the Matrix, Cyrus. Like, ignorance is bliss. I'm good. I don't need to know
Mm-hmm.
what's going on in the real world because I built a life here and I like it. He says it. He's like, Loki, I like it. He's there enjoying the pie. He's obviously really, really good at his job. He's a leader in the
Yeah.
TVA. And so one has to understand just the place that he's in. And because it has been thousands and thousands of years for him, that's a hard thing to all of a sudden break away from, and to deal with the reality that everything you've been doing has not been something necessarily because of your own making. It's because somebody just plopped you out of one place and put you into another, and they've created a
Mm-hmm.
situation for you. And that's a really crazy thing. And it got me thinking, like, have the lives that we've seen outside of the TVA with the people and the employees, it hasn't been many, but have any of them been that great? I remember in season one we saw Ravonna Renslayer's alternate life. It looked like she might have been like a school principal or something like that,
Yeah.
or a guidance
Mm-hmm.
counselor. I don't remember if we saw Hunter B15's life. I know she got the information revealed to her, and obviously she came to and realized, like, oh, I had a life
Mm-hmm.
before this. I don't know if we saw that, but then there was that other Hunter that Sylvie was having dinner with in season one, and Sylvie was like trying to sort of do some mind control, and it seemed like she had just an ordinary life. I don't know if it was amazing per se, but they've been very guarded with their approach about how much they show us in terms of what
Mm-hmm.
type of lives people live outside of this reality. To your point about what is Mobius's life, they absolutely have to show us. But man, I do wonder if the majority of these lives are just kind of ordinary, uneventful, mundane lifestyles, and maybe the
Right.
TVA work, as dangerous as it is, might be some of the most exciting things that they've done. Do you have any thoughts about
Mm-hmm.
what that might have looked like, and just their approach in terms of keeping that super guarded at this point?
Man, I really don't know. Part of me even feels like at this point that they purposely chose, or he who remains purposely chose successful people, or seemingly happy and successful people, right? Only because we haven't got a glimpse of anybody that has been down in the dumps, or that has been, maybe not doing life so well yet. And I think, it's like that because, let's say you wipe somebody's memory, they have to have the skills and the tools in order to operate something as crazy as the TVA. And I think that's kind of my thought. One of my thoughts behind it is like, man, we need capable people. So let's wipe the minds of capable people and put them in the TVA. And I'm thinking maybe that's why they are holding some of those things so close to the chest. Also, my other thought is that everybody, all will be revealed to all of the employees here very soon. And they're kind of saving some of those moments for when that happens. Like, oh, here are our big characters and where they are, what they used to do. Versus like, some of the smaller people we haven't even met in the TVA. Part of me feels like they're saving like a little montage or a little thing with different moments in which that happens. So yeah, that's kind of what I think.
Yeah, potentially so. I mean, there's a lot more people we're having relationships with now, so
Mm-hmm.
that could be a really impactful moment. Because on one hand, the work in the TVA has been important and it has been eventful and it's dangerous. Obviously, it's manufactured and it's not real.
Mm-hmm.
But if they have like these ordinary lives, like what is that gonna be like? Like, how are they gonna react to like, oh, I was just like a construction worker on Earth? Like, that's what I did?
That's
I
true.
don't know. I don't know if that's what I would want to go back to. I mean, it's
Mm-hmm.
very I think there's probably a lot more Mobiuses out there than we might think, that are kind of
Yeah,
like, I'm good here. It might be that
yeah.
thing, and I'd
And
be interested to see.
and B15, she just made, the simplest point where it's like it should just be their choice. And I think that's really it. Or literally first episode, she was like, regardless, we have to tell them. And I
Yeah.
think that's the thing out of all of this. If B15 knows and continues to work for the TVA, that's her choice. If you know what I mean, if Mobius knows, continues to work for TVA, that's his choice. But I think that's the thing. Giving people first the information of where they come from is important. And then being able to say, you have a choice to stay here or not, given the information that you have. And so we obviously understand somebody like Brad Wolf slash X5 would go back to Earth and live his life as a movie star, but everyone might not be in that camp. People like Mobius might stay, but it's that choice that matters.
No, no doubt. Imagine if Brad Wolf was like a porn star instead. He definitely would have hopped at that too. He'd have been like, "Oh, that's the movies I'm
He
making.
definitely would
Bet
have. He said,
I'm,
"Bet I'm out of here."
I'm going for that." Let's talk about Sylvie. She comes back in a big way in this episode. We had a lot of questions about McDonald's in Tulsa, Oklahoma. What the fuck is going on with that? And we get a little bit more information, but ultimately, Loki, Mobius, Hunter B15, they're able to find Sylvie in Tulsa at this McDonald's, and they also take Brad Wolf alongside with them in the adventure. And you get this very, very interesting interaction between Loki and Sylvie. They have not truly seen each other, not in a real way, since the events of the season one finale, in which we just saw the rift really established between the two. They finally reached the end of time. They found He Who Remains. Sylvie, her life's purpose was pretty much fulfilled in that moment, and she felt betrayed by Loki because he wanted to just like take a moment to really think about what they were going to do and think about the
Mm-hmm.
consequences. And this kind of reminds me of that moment where it's like you run into an ex that you probably haven't seen in a long time, and it's like, oh, this is awkward as fuck. What do I say to this person that I have
Mm-hmm.
not seen? And you got one person who's probably still a little bit angry about how things went down, and then you got the other person
Mm-hmm.
who's just trying to like focus on the moment right now. They're just trying to be like, hey, how you
Yeah.
doing? What's up? Are you good? And I think that that's what's represented here, because Sylvie, her face dropped so quickly when Loki walked
Mm-hmm.
into that McDonald's. She was not happy, and Loki obviously is very much trying to get through to her and make her realize the importance of just everything that's happening, and to understand that there are bigger forces at play. Obviously, her actions didn't really end anything. It kind of kickstarted a lot of shit that they're now having to deal with. What did you think about just those opening moments to see Sylvie, her reaction to seeing Loki there, and then just the conversation that they also had afterwards? The fact that Sylvie was like, look, I don't want anything to do with the TVA. I've done what I needed to do. I don't want to help you. My mission is fulfilled. I'm happy here. Let's move on. And on the opposite side, obviously Loki is trying to sort of win her services back over.
Hey yo, Sylvie is insane because like she wreaked havoc in this whole season of this TV show through the TVA, through she's the reason there's times going all over the place right now. And then she wants to go work at McDonald's, bro. And then expected to be left alone. Like that's your expectation is that nobody's gonna come looking for you
Let me
after you've
ask you
done.
this. What's more wild? Her doing that, or Thanos literally wiping out half of humanity and going to a random remote planet and chilling, and starting a career of gardening
That
right
nigga
after he does
started
that?
farming and gardening, bro. Hey, both of them are nuts, man. At least Thanos had like a sense of retirement. You know what I mean? Like Sylvie was like, I'm finna go flip these burgers, my nigga. Like
Yo.
I'm finna go take orders at McDonald's. Like, why is that your plan of action. They're both kind of insane, but Sylvie's is just slightly more insane because she still got to work. Like, why are you working? You are a whole God of Mischief. Why are you doing any of this? It's so crazy. But yeah, man, it's funny that they literally had to pull up to this McDonald's of this girl working the front desk at McDonald's. And it's I love how I guess how kind of stale she is, right? When she first sees Loki, it's almost like for a second, it's almost like she pretended like she didn't even know who he was, even though they were like staring at each other. It was almost like, so you gonna order or what? Like, you want some nuggets, bro? Like, what do you want? I really love that interaction. But for the conversation that happens after, mainly, man, it's really like I again, I don't know exactly what Sylvie expected 100%. Like, now that she knows the stakes of everything, right? Now that Loki has told her the stakes of everything and she's seen for herself, it's very interesting to me how quickly I think she had to jump back in and felt like she could jump back in, right? To this sort of thing. But man, the conversations they were having was like, Loki's like, look, you won't have any of this if you don't help us right now. Sure, you may have messed up some stuff. Sure, you may have accomplished your life goals. But now none of that still doesn't matter. Even the decision you just made will still not matter if you don't come help us right now. And I think that's a heavy thing to put on somebody's shoulders. Again, as much as she wanted to be left alone, I was like, no, you don't get to just do all this and kind of let it go by. I feel like that from a writing standpoint, personally. And I kind of would have been upset if it was like, well, Sylvie's not in the story anymore. She did all this and now she gets to go chill and work at McDonald's. I'm like, no, you cannot. You know what I mean? Like, there's just no way they're gonna write this like this. And so I love, again, her involvement in Loki having to give her the real, man. And it's also interesting because even in that moment, in the conversations they're having, none of it is really about their relationship, you know what I mean, or how they feel about each other, anything like that. It's about Loki's about that business. When he pull up, he's like, look, I don't know what this is or what we got going on, but this is the real, and this is what we need to do in order to save whatever your job at McDonald's. This is what we got to do. And so again, I'm sure it'll come up in these next couple episodes, but part of me loves that Loki was like, skip all this, I'm trying to save the world and we'll figure that shit out later. And so yeah, it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, she's still so raw about what happened. She's obviously, I think, kind of blinded by the rage of just the moment and the sense of betrayal that she went, with Loki. I mean, she was already a very hardened individual when they met.
Mm,
Like, she was
yeah.
not having any of Loki's antics. She didn't want to work together with him. She didn't want to open up, but slowly, like, Loki's charm and his relatability to her, obviously the fact that they are both Lokis, they were able to really establish something, a meaningful relationship, and
Hmm.
something that eventually grew to be what felt like it was romantic as well. And I think that,
Yeah.
she had her heart broken. Essentially, that's what it came down to. She probably, for a quick second, and maybe the only moment in her life, found somebody that she could actually open up and be vulnerable to. And then
Mm-hmm.
simultaneously, at the same time, in the midst of probably the most traumatic experience of their lives, confronting he who remains, like, this is like their destiny staring themselves in the eye. She all of a sudden feels like that this person that she opened up to is backstabbing her, and she decides to take matters into her own hands. And so there's a lot to Sylvie. She's incredibly
Hmm.
complex and layered. I know a lot of us can sit back and be like, yo, what the fuck are you doing? Not only did you fuck shit up in season one by making the decision that you made, which is going to cause possibly a multiversal war, but now you're being hard-headed about wanting to come back and help out the TVA and trying to do what you're, what we think is right in order to fix this
Hmm.
mess. But her mindset is, and we hear it at the end of the episode, the TVA is the problem. This
Yeah.
is this is literally the source of the issue. None of this would be happening if the TVA didn't exist to begin with. The pruning of the timelines, these lives being slaughtered and killed and
Hmm.
wiped out of existence, us having to
Exactly.
even, sort of reconcile all of this to begin with, all these questions, all this uncertainty. That's her mindset, which I think has to certainly be taken into consideration. Like, that's
For
that's
sure.
that's very valid. Like, what the fuck
Hmm.
is the TVA? Why does it exist? Like, if we're just assuming he who remains is telling the absolute truth, then okay, there is some I think reasonability to the existence of it. But the fact that, what we talked about earlier, you're taking people from their lives and wiping their
Mhm.
minds and essentially having them operate under a false pretense, which is what they tried to do with her, and she wasn't having it. They took her
Right.
as a young girl and tried to
Yep.
prune her out of existence. And so I get it. I get why she is so upset and
Mhm.
mad. But low key on the opposite side, as you said, we got to get through to that right now. We got to cut through all of that. We don't have time to talk about this stuff. We don't have
Mhm.
time to unpack your feelings because the urgency is now. The moment is literally now, and we saw it was indeed now because right after this, we finally do find out, the whole plan from General Docs. We had a lot of questions last week about what her motivations were. We saw her take a ton of agents and go to who knows where, and clearly it was meant to be something that we were suspicious of, and we saw that that was the case. Essentially, she was going to undermine the judge's rules that were laid down last week and prune all of these branches in the timeline, effectively killing billions and billions and billions of people. And we get a really, really emotionally charged scene at the end of this. It's preceded by an action scene where Loki and Mobius and Sylvie have to go prevent this from happening any further. But it's too little, too late, really. I mean,
Mhm.
they are able to prune a ton of timelines, and we get to see all of the TVA employees. We get to see Hunter B-15 and Mobius and Loki react to this in real time. Like, I feel like in the past in season one, when we saw or heard about timelines being pruned, it was just like a throwaway line. It didn't mean anything. But now you actually get to understand the horrificness of it, just like how crazy it is. Like all of these people's lives and existence are just kind of being wiped out without any sort of consideration. And it's a really, I think it's an emotional scene, and it's one that definitely delivers kind of the point of the show and really, really the conflict of where we probably are going for the rest of the season. So, what did you think about just seeing all of this unfold, seeing the reveal of General Dox's plans, and then, of course, just the
Mhm.
reaction to it on the part of all the TVA employees?
Yeah, I love the lead up to it. I love how we was all like, "Nah," or they purposely, planted that Easter egg for us to be like, "Nah, this cannot be all just for Sylvie." And I love how we all bought into that, but none of us knew the details of exactly what was going on. And I think it's interesting because even though I knew it was something not good, I for some reason did not foresee it being to this degree of purging all of these timelines and killing all of these people, because then by the end of it, when it they pretty much succeed, for the most part. Like we're able to save a couple of the timelines, but for the most part, to see the Docs pretty much succeeded in a lot of her plan, and you go back to the TVA and see everyone so sad, and B-15 being like, those are all people, and the way she says it, and you watch all the lines disappear in slow motion, and it's dead quiet in the TVA is a crazy emotional moment. Like it was sad, and it wasn't, again, it was not a lot of dialogue in that moment. We were made to sit in it. We were made to be sad. There's a lot of things that happens in these some of these MCU projects and shows that we don't always get to sit in the sadness, right? That's what makes Infinity War so crazy. It's like, well, we lost. And we sat in it for a year. You know what I'm saying? Like we sat in it for a very long time. And so it was, again, just a very emotional moment, man. It was like, damn, they really won this time. I love that action too. I love that Sylvie and Loki had to do the hold hand thing. She was like, "Don't, don't read too much into it," and just grabbed your hand and whatever explodey thing. I still don't know what to call that thing. It's like the Loki. I have no idea. Loki lash. That's my new name for it. Just now, it's the Loki lash.
Trademark that.
Uh, trademark that. I should. But it's cool, man. It's cool it's just cool to see where it feels like there was a real villain, real conflict, and real heroism happening. Although we lost in that moment, it feels like, damn, like no, this is still a comic book TV show. And so the moment sucked and it was very emotional, but it felt like I was watching something worthwhile, if that makes sense. Even though we lost. And so I'm interested, if anything, to see where they go from here. Because Loki, it feels like, okay, what's next? Like she purged hella people. Like this wasn't like a normal thing. Like they said, like she killed billions of people easily just off of that. So again, I don't know where we go, but man, I just know the opening of season or episode 3 is gonna be sad because it's already still sad right now.
Yeah, unlike the other Marvel shows where it's six episode seasons, and by episode 2, the end of episode 2, I'm like, all right, well, we don't got that much time. It's time to probably pick up the pace. I don't have any feelings about that because it's like the pace has been picked up significantly because in
Yeah.
episode 2,
Hmm.
the conflict is there. The stakes have been risen incredibly high. We have just wiped out billions and billions of people at the hand of General Dox, and she did it mercilessly. Like she didn't give a fuck at all. And
She
she
didn't.
even says at the end, like, our plan has been compromised. Like they had more to do. They weren't finished. Like they were gonna prune more timelines. And that's a
Oof.
crazy thing to think about. And as you said, just the reactions of everybody in the TVA. I mean, I just love sort of the conflict and the differentiating opinions between the moment that's happening and Sylvie literally inside the TVA saying the TVA is rotten. It's broken.
Mhm.
It needs to be finished. It needs to end. And then you have Loki who has almost like become like a full-fledged TVA employee at this point saying like, "Well, no, that probably doesn't need to happen because this is probably the only line of defense that we have against Kang the Conqueror. Like nothing
It's
else
crazy.
can take him on."
Mhm.
So when you're dealing with that and you're seeing all of these lives just evaporate in front of you, that's a pretty heady idea that I think that they're starting
Yeah.
to unpack a crazy wild sci-fi concept like this organization that's been systematically broken for so long. Can they be good? Can they do good
Hmm.
things? Or is the
Hmm.
leadership just too affected at all of the history and all of the stuff that's been done to them and the fact that
The
as we know
police. But continue.
uh-oh, there you go. There you go. Yep, yep. No, I mean that's it right there. Like what level of good can they do? You know, just
Mhm.
knowing that there is stuff that's fundamentally not right with the organization as a whole, you know,
Yeah.
and Docs as a character, she said it last week. Them knowing that the timekeepers weren't real, she said this changes nothing. This doesn't do anything. Like we
Mhm.
keep forward, we continue with our mission, and she denied a direct order from her superior, and we saw what that resulted into with the loss of billions. And so I think it's an incredible conflict to deal with because it feels like the TVA might be around to stay. Like they might be a really, really impactful and important
Mhm.
presence. And it made me think like with this larger like multiverse saga, phase 4, phase 5, phase 6,
Yeah.
does it not feel like the TVA should not just be the focal point of all of this? It
Yeah.
hasn't really been at this point so far. It has been in
Mhm.
Loki, obviously, but as we think about Kang Dynasty and Secret Wars, we still don't necessarily know what that's going to look like. But
Yep.
why not the TVA? Why isn't the TVA just the central focal point of all of this? Because I think better than any other property that we've seen up until this point, Loki is a series and TVA is a construct and as an idea within what we're doing with the multiverse has worked out tremendously better than all the other stuff that we've seen reinvented over and over again. What do you think about that?
Yeah. Man, I feel like I hinted at that. You know, in our last when we're talking about episode one, man, because it really is this big concept of time. Feel like just needs again, it just needs a vehicle, man. It needs when you talk about time, there has to be some kind of something, some kind of construct for everyone to look over and say, okay, those are the rules. And it feels like the TVA can very much carry that out. The TVA can very much say, okay, it's time for Secret Wars. This is everything that needs to happen in Secret Wars. And the TVA has shepherded in all of those ideas. It has given us the rules about time. It has given us the rules about maybe eventually incursions, right? It has given us the rules about what it means to purge timelines, to whatever, and all of these things. And you know, you speak about we might need the TVA, or Loki feels we might need the TVA. It might be the thing to destroy Kang. It makes sense because a Kang variant created it. And a lot of times, the thing that destroys is itself, right? The thing you needed to destroy is itself. And I think the TVA very much can be that, but it's about, you know, getting those weeds out and figuring out the way forward. And so that's what this season feels like, is the way forward. But I really, really hope that the TVA really is this thing that maintains throughout all of this, man. Not only that, TVA has a lot of really cool like stories in it, right? I'm still waiting on like when Doctor Strange messes up in the timeline somewhere and She-Hulk has to come be his lawyer in the TVA. Like, we have those pieces. They're literally there. You know what I'm saying? It just needs, everything needs to transpire. But I'm hoping that we can that again, Marvel puts enough, I think, faith in Loki, in the TVA as an organization in order to do that. And so I think one of my hopes, you know, something we talked about last episode, is that the TVA has to exist in like Deadpool in Wolverine, right?
Right, right.
Maybe maybe that's our first test of like, can the TVA or the thought of the TVA exist in other Marvel projects that isn't Loki, right? Because we're really not talking about it outside of Loki right now, and so I'm hoping that movie is like, oh, it works here. Okay, now let's put it in the next project. Oh, let's put it in the project after that, because maybe we've been talking about the connectedness of the MCU. The TVA can very much just be that, the connectedness, because it's so chaotic in the TVA that I think it could be organized chaos, right? And that's where the TVA could lie. That could be our through line. That's our controller adapter. Plug in, everything plugs into the TVA, and that's how we all get to sit down and understand what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, it's what they did with Shield in phases 1 and 2. Like Shield was everywhere.
Literally.
Shield was the organization that brought all of that stuff
Mm-hmm.
together. TVA in and of itself is an organization, and similar to Shield, a broken organization that has people that have infiltrated the organization and that are operating under false
Yep.
pretenses and have ulterior motives. Like it's the same thing, but you're dealing with time and multiverses and all that different stuff. It's like how have we not seen the TVA and other properties up until this point? It's kind of
Exactly.
crazy amongst like 20 things that have been released in phase 4. So I do hope, in future projects, hopefully Deadpool 3, phase 5, phase 6, maybe the TVA will take more prominence. Perhaps season 2 of Loki had to be the thing that occurred to get us there. Perhaps we have to fix the TVA as best as we can so that it can be that organization that moves forward in other properties. But I'll be interested to see if they carry forth sort of that momentum of what they've built here and hopefully
Mm-hmm.
establish some other connecting pieces. And also they have a device. The temp pad is like very much a
Yep.
thing that allows anybody to go anywhere. And we saw at the end of this episode that Sylvie does still indeed have a temp pad. She can go back to Tulsa, she can go to the end of time, she can go to the TVA, she can go wherever she wants to go. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that, sort of that last shot that focuses on her is kind of telling of where we might see her go for the rest of the series. Any last thoughts about how this episode impacts the rest of the season? Or where we might go in episode 3, 4, 5, 6 as we continue on with this journey.
Man, I think the next questions right now that we have found Sylvie is our three big characters that's missing, bro. It's time to talk about He Who Remains slash Kang. It's time to talk about Renslayer, and it's time to talk about Miss Minutes, man. People don't like Miss Minutes. I don't know why. I think it might be Tara Strong's fault. It might be the character. She's hella creepy, but also like hella cool looking to me. I don't know. I really just want to see Miss Minutes on whatever side of all that she's in. But there's a huge story between He Who Remains or Kane the Conqueror and Renslayer. Again, if you don't know it, go look it up. They've been like in love forever in comics. But it's an important story that I think is going to matter in this series of Loki, man. And so that is kind of the stuff I'm looking forward to. I'm looking for all the weird nitty gritty stuff when it comes to their relationship, and again how Miss Minutes ties into all this. And we got to see Victor Timely at some point. So,
Yep.
hey, it's time to get to the nitty gritty, like you said. This episode very much I can't call it a filler. A lot went down. I can't call it a filler, but it very much gave us a lot of context and a lot of story to push the narrative. It gave us a lot of plot in this episode to kind of say, all right, we laid some groundwork. Now let's get to it in these next 4 episodes. So I'm just looking forward to again seeing those three characters that I talked about and really the adventures of Mobius and Loki, man. I'm excited to see what happens.
I'm very much in alignment with the Ravonna Renslayer, He Who Remains Kang connection. There was that audio recording in the last episode.
Mm-hmm.
We can hear them talking to each other. And so I'm like, oh, what's that? Like that obviously is going to come back around. They're going to probably that might be episode 5. We actually sort of
Right.
resolve whatever that is, but they are clearly leaning into that, their relationship with each other and what that might look like. I mean, I would love to see, I don't know if we're going to see it, but I would love to actually see the origin of the
Yes.
TVA. Like the
Yes.
exact start of
A
it.
throwback episode,
Oh
please.
man, that would be
Please.
incredible. See He Who
Mm-hmm.
Remains literally build this, how he meets Ravonna or Mobius. Like that could all answer the questions we're asking about these past
Exactly.
lives and their relationships with each other and just all of that stuff. I think it'd be really, really enlightening. So I hope that they go down that territory later in the season. But folks, those are all of our thoughts about the second episode of season 2 of Loki. If you've checked out the latest episode, definitely hit us up and let us know what you think.